Hey gamers, Maniac here with GameXS.net doing a brand new Fail, the ongoing series where I talk about Hollywood's failures both in and outside of the pictures. Already we've talked about Superman and we've talked about Terminator. You're probably asking yourself, well, what are we going to be tackling about next? I have to give props to a certain individual on YouTube for inspiring this video. He calls himself The Dom. He does a series called Lost in Adaptation where he talks about books that have been adapted into films and talks about their changes. I really enjoy his ongoing series. And basically, one of his more recent Lost in Adaptation videos, as of the time of this video being recorded, was a video he produced about Who Framed Roger Rabbit, comparing it to its original book by Gary Wolfe, who censored Roger Rabbit. I gotta say, I love that video, and it was part of the inspiration for why I'm going to be talking about this. You're probably asking yourself, well, okay, I was a child of the 90s, maybe you are as well. You gotta remember the movie called Who Framed Roger Rabbit. It was probably considered to be one of the most groundbreaking movies of its time, and to this day is probably considered to be, in fact, I would argue it would be considered a list of one of the greatest films of all time overall. It's that good. I grew up when I was watching the right amount of time of the early 60s or even earlier than that, Warner Brothers and Disney cartoons. And by the time the 90s rolled around, I think that both Disney and Warner Brothers were doing a second renaissance when it came down to films like, series like Tiny Toon Adventures and Animaniacs for Warner Brothers, and Disney, of course, had the Disney Afternoon. This movie, when I first watched it as a kid, appealed to me. I felt it struck all the right notes. Everything about it was correct. They had the right teams working on it, they had the right animators working on it, they had the right script, they had the right actors. Everything worked. And if you haven't seen this movie, alright, I'll give you a break. Stop the video right now and take a look. Alright, we're back. Okay, good. You've seen the movie? Good. Now you know what I'm talking about. Now you're probably asking yourself, if you're just seeing it, my God, that was a really good film. Why did they never release a sequel? Was the movie unsuccessful when it was released? Nope. I'm going to include right down here in the subtitles, can you guys see this? This right now is probably going to be what the figures were and the budget for this film. Not adjusted for inflation. The movie actually did quite well, both critically and financially at its time. This was not some movie that was ignored in the box office when it was first released and then discovered when it hit the home video. This movie was successful at its time and is successful even to this day. There is no reason, logically or financially, when you think about it, especially given the fact of how much money it made in its time, if a movie that was released today was basically released with this amount of money. Look! A movie that would make less than this in the box office would have been guaranteed at least 2 sequels. No joke! Why was a movie never made? Why did they never make a sequel? Was something wrong? Well, there were a couple of things wrong, and I kind of have to start telling you about this. At the time, there were 2 major organizations. I know that it probably seems like when you look at the DVD box, or when you look at the VHS box, or when you look at the screen when you first start watching Who Framed Roger Rabbit, you're probably saying to yourself, this is a Disney picture. Disney was responsible for making this movie. And yes, that's partially true. Disney is responsible for making this picture, but they weren't the only studio that was responsible for making this picture. There was another production company that was responsible for making it as well. A company called Amblin Entertainment, whose studio honcho at the time was the veritable director Steven Spielberg, who you may remember from such films as Jaws, E.T., Raiders of the Lost Ark. Yeah, considered to be some of the greatest films of all time. Spielberg was a genius, way ahead of his time, knew exactly how to make a picture and knew how to make it well. His production studio was responsible for also getting that film made. Obviously, it wasn't directed by Spielberg, even though Spielberg had shared a producer's credit in his team in it as well. The film was directed by, of course, Robert Zemeckis, and of course, there's no complaints there. But coming out of that movie, the important thing to know is that all Roger Rabbit franchise information, if any future Roger Rabbit productions needed to be made, had to be both signed off by Disney and Amblin at the same time. Now, the person who was in charge of Disney at the time was a man named Michael Eisner. He used to work for Paramount. He worked for Disney for many years. He's probably considered to be many people, including that some jerk with a camera, Tony Goldmark, credited him as being the guy who probably saved Disney from bankruptcy. So yeah, this Eisner guy was a smart guy and knew exactly what he was doing when he worked on Who Framed Roger Rabbit when he got that film made. So, but also Amblin had to be responsible and also worked on that as well. So they had a 50-50 share for any rights to the Roger Rabbit franchise. Now, they weren't butting heads going into the picture. They weren't butting heads coming out of the picture. In fact, these guys were talking about everything. They were talking about doing Roger Rabbit shorts. They were talking about doing a Roger Rabbit animated series. They were talking about Roger Rabbit sequels. And heck, they were even talking about Roger Rabbit rides. So there was a lot of Roger Rabbit stuff going into it, and a lot of ways they felt that they could both expand the mythos of Roger Rabbit and merchandise that for both of their benefits. But there were a couple of things that were working against Roger Rabbit. The major component of the reason why a lot of people probably don't know about, maybe some people don't know about this, but after Roger Rabbit's release, it received 3 cartoon shorts that were produced for it. They were all produced by Disney with the blessing of Amblin, but I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. After Roger Rabbit's release and success, Disney was planning on developing a movie called Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, who many of you may have seen. Their plans were to attach a Roger Rabbit short to the beginning of the film, kind of like old school cartoons. You get a little cartoon before the movie would start off. And they included a Roger Rabbit cartoon, basically with every reel of Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, called Tummy Trouble. The idea behind the Roger Rabbit cartoons was that they just simply wanted to show Roger Rabbit when he was doing his thing. Before the events or maybe after the events, just him being an actor, what his cartoons would have looked like. Kind of similar to how they chose to open the Roger Rabbit movie. The first one they released was a movie called Tummy Trouble, which was a funny short which involved Roger Rabbit basically having to take care of Baby Herman after he swallowed a rattle, and all of the hijinks both Baby Herman and Roger Rabbit had to get through in the hospital. It's a funny short. It was attached to every copy of the VHS version of Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. That's where I first saw it, actually. And I enjoyed it quite a bit. I thought it was really funny. There was a live-action component at the end of it because you really can't have a Roger Rabbit, anything without some live-action interaction. But for the most part, it was simply a Roger Rabbit cartoon. Thought it was really good. And a lot of people considered that to be a good thing for Disney because many have credited that the Roger Rabbit short made Honey, I Shrunk the Kids a bit more successful. People watched it, more people saw it in theaters because of the Roger Rabbit short. So, going into the first short, things between Amblin and Disney were pretty good. However, they were planning on doing a second short. Now, there was some other stuff that I want to talk about before, that they were planning on for Roger Rabbit before I want to get talking about this second short, because the second short is kind of where the honeymoon kind of ended for Disney and Amblin. There was something else that Disney was working on. Obviously, Disney owns bi-coastal theme parks that are considered to be some of the greatest theme parks of all time. And Disney was planning on creating an addition to Disneyland, the California Anaheim theme park that they had. They're crowning, their first theme park, their first major theme park. And creating basically a Toontown, or adapting the Toontown that you would have seen in the Who Framed Roger Rabbit movie, and basically having people be able to take a look at it. People walk through it. Basically making it open to the general public if they went to Disneyland. The centerpiece of this would have been a Roger Rabbit ride. Well, they did it. There is a Roger Rabbit ride. It worked. They broke ground on it. I've personally gone on it. I think it's one of my favorite rides. It's probably one of my favorite rides in Disneyland, actually. Granted, I haven't been on it. I haven't been to Disneyland in probably around, I don't know, oh my gosh, probably 20 years. That was probably the last time I haven't been to Disneyland. Oh God, I'm old. But I remember going on it as a teenager and enjoying it. But I think that's kind of where this story is going to come to an end. Because if you notice, there was no, usually any rides that were made in Disneyland would usually be guaranteed to go to Disney World. But that didn't really happen here in this case. There is no Roger Rabbit ride in Disney World. The cartoon spin was never brought to Disney World. Why was that? What was going on at the time? Well, Disney was planning on producing a second Roger Rabbit short. Their intention was to release it around the time that Dick Tracy was going to be coming out. It was called Roller Coaster Rabbit. Now, at the time, Steven Spielberg was also working on another film of his called Arachnophobia. Spielberg expected Roller Coaster Rabbit was going to be attached to Arachnophobia because I don't think that they thought that Arachnophobia was going to do very well critically or financially. But Eisner was expecting that it was going to be involving, that Roller Coaster Rabbit was going to be attached to Dick Tracy, which was going to come out around the same time. So you've got one person expecting one thing and another person expecting one thing. Who won? Well, I can say this because I went to go see Dick Tracy in the theaters. Again, I'm old. But Roller Coaster Rabbit was attached to Dick Tracy. Spielberg didn't get his way. And Steven Spielberg was the kind of guy that expected to get his way. Now, I can't say how sore Steven Spielberg might have been. I only have second and third party information about this, but I do know what happened after that. Disney had commissioned a third Roger Rabbit cartoon short to be released. It was going to be called Hair in My Soup. It would have involved Roger Rabbit basically getting into hijinks while at a restaurant. And Disney's intention was to release it alongside The Rocketeer. Another Disney picture that they didn't know if it was going to do pretty well, but they were putting a lot of money behind it. But they didn't quite know if it was going to do well critically, financially, or anything. Well, Spielberg nixed Hair in My Soup. Amblin did not approve it, which basically forced Disney to stop production of it. Hair in My Soup was never finished. I think that there are some pictures online. When I was doing my research for this fail, I found pictures online of what were supposed to be some simple matte paintings, as well as animation cells for Hair in My Soup that looked pretty funny. But the picture was never released, it was never finished, the money was pulled. And obviously, The Rocketeer was released by itself as a standalone. Did not do well critically or financially, although I remember seeing it on the Disney Channel in 1993 or so and enjoying it quite a bit. I still think it was a pretty good film. Even though a lot of people really didn't like it, I thought it was pretty decent. Wish it had done better, but even I have to remember I never saw it in the theaters. What happened after that? At this point, it was almost like a bickering married couple, basically. I guess that's the best way you could put it. Amblin and Disney basically owned 50-50 share on it, and they were not agreeing on projects for it. I think Disney intended to do a Roger Rabbit cartoon series that Amblin would not approve. Basically, that would have been released for the Disney afternoon, and they didn't get approval for it. So Disney decided to go anyway and do it. And so what they did was they just simply changed the character. It was the exact same context, it was the exact same idea, but since they couldn't use any of the Roger Rabbit characters, they simply just replaced Roger Rabbit with similar characters, and they released the series Bonkers. For those of you who might be wondering why Bonkers was released in the first place, when they simply could have done a Roger Rabbit series, that's why. Eventually, Disney intended to do another Roger Rabbit short, which was going to be called Trail Mix-Up. And it was produced and it was released with a movie. I can't remember what the movie was called. It was so forgettable. I don't think anybody actually saw it. But it was for a joint Disney-Amblin picture. Again, I can't remember what it was called or anything like that. I'll probably just write it down below. But I can't think of a single person. I can't remember it ever getting released back in the day. I certainly don't think I've seen it. But that was the last time that a Roger Rabbit short was ever produced, was for this Trail Mix-Up. And that was the last time we ever saw Roger Rabbit appear really in any form short of the Roger Rabbit ride. Now, I said before, there were plans to do a Roger Rabbit sequel. What happened there? Well, a few things. Like I said before, Disney and Amblin at this part were kind of on shaky terms, basically. They would work together for mutual interest, but they weren't like gung-ho for everything for Roger Rabbit at this point. You know, unless Disney produced something that was really in their benefit, they weren't gonna, you know, they weren't just gonna approve it, which is probably why Roger Rabbit content and Roger Rabbit cartoon, you know, merchandise and stuff like that used to be very common back in the day. When I was young, you couldn't, you know, Roger Rabbit figurines, you know, Jessica Rabbit stuff, Benny the Cat stuff, all this stuff was everywhere, basically. You don't really see that kind of stuff that often anymore. And you think that Disney, who merchandises everything to the wazoo, would be merchandising Roger Rabbit. They really don't. It's kind of why. But Disney did have a script for not a Roger Rabbit sequel, but a Roger Rabbit prequel. Anybody who's seen Who Framed Roger Rabbit, you're probably asking yourself, where can they go from here? The story is over. But there's actually more stories that they could tell. So they decided to make a Roger Rabbit prequel. A man got involved with a Roger Rabbit prequel that was going to be called Toon Platoon. And he wrote a script. I've read part of the script and I've read script notes for this script. It looked pretty decent. It would have involved basically the origin of Roger Rabbit, how he became famous. And I'm not talking about the origin of Roger Rabbit, who you might remember from Gary Wolfe's book. That's a separate universe from what would become the Who Framed Roger Rabbit universe. This would have been a completely separate origin from what Gary Wolfe had written for Who Censored Roger Rabbit, and would have involved Roger Rabbit fighting in World War II, of all things, finding out that he was adopted, how he met Jessica Rabbit, or the woman that would become Jessica Rabbit, how they ended up getting together, what World War II would have been like if it had been fought alongside cartoon characters, and would have ended with Roger Rabbit finding out that Bugs Bunny was his father. Those were the plans. It was funny. It had, you know, the cartoon antics that you would realize. Kind of, you know, some reviewers had said it kind of opened a little slowly, and even I have to admit that. Like I said, I haven't read the script, but there were a lot of funny gags that they would have brought into. You're probably imagining, wow, it would have been really awesome to see real-life soldiers fighting World War II alongside cartoon characters. Yeah, that would have been awesome. Imagine the opening of Saving Private Ryan with cartoon characters in the background. I would pay good money to go see that. Yes, you heard me, Steven Spielberg. I would pay good money to see that picture. Moving on. The gag is, you're probably asking yourself, wouldn't that violate some kind of rule if cartoon characters would have fought in World War II? It kind of did. The gag was that no, even though cartoon characters couldn't die in this universe, you think they'd be great to fight in World War II. The problem was that the cartoon characters were all pacifists. Is a reference that Roger made. Basically, they couldn't bring themselves to harm anybody. Even if they went on the front lines, all they tried to do was make the enemy laugh, which was kind of useful, but not totally useful. Anybody who's seen the Monty Python sketch about the funniest joke in the world would know that is kind of useful, but not 100% useful. Most of the tunes were being used by this point in the story for basically medics, ambulances. Imagine MASH with cartoon characters. Again, I would pay money to see that. So good script, a lot going for it. What was wrong? What happened? Like I said, there was the Disney Amblin animosity. There was also Steven Spielberg, who had just finished Schindler's List. Now, you're probably wondering, for anybody who might have seen Indiana Jones and the Crystal Skull, why was Indiana Jones fighting communists in that movie when it was so clear that he was simply fighting Nazis, but the word Nazis would probably change from Nazis to communists? Why was everything about the communists in that movie basically Nazis? But they weren't. They never had a fight about ideology in that movie, or the communist ideologies. In fact, even the communists, even old school communists denounced at this film, and I knew, even watching it, how terrible that movie was, that no communists, even back then, from all the research that I've done about the Cold War, and I've done plenty of it, both in school and afterwards, no, they would never have acted that way. Two communists would not have just kidnapped 2 American citizens on American soil in broad daylight in a public place. That would never have happened. Which is why I acknowledge that no Crystal Skull movie ever existed. But we're going to talk about that. But you're probably wondering why communists in that movie. Not, you know, Indiana Jones always fought Nazis. After Schindler's List, Steven Spielberg had a reformation of faith. This is from what I've seen from sources and a few other things. He didn't want to make any more movies where Nazis were the bad guys. I'm sure he figured Schindler's List was it. Once you've depicted Schindler's List, there's nowhere to go with Nazis, basically. And he didn't want to make another picture or be involved in another picture that would be involving Nazis. So the Toon Platoon idea didn't really happen because Nazis were the main villain in that story. But another prequel was made. Another script was made that would have gone even further back, which I believe would have been titled Who Discovered Roger Rabbit? Which would have been another prequel, but it would have been even further back, involving Roger Rabbit during the Great Depression. And he would have ended up, I haven't read this script or part of it, I haven't found a copy of this script, but from what I've seen from the script notes that people have published online, it would have involved Roger Rabbit basically trying to make it big on Broadway, him meeting Jessica for the first time. I think she was an aspiring actress who mostly only was doing cartoon sound effects. She wasn't doing, because cartoons can do sound effects and stuff like that, so she was basically a voice for radio doing sound effects. She wasn't being used as an actress, and that's really what she wanted to be. I think it also would have ended with Roger discovering that Bugs Bunny was his father, similar to the Toon Platoon script, but it didn't happen. It wasn't made. Now you're probably wondering, well, why wasn't that one made? It probably would have gotten Spielberg's approval, and from what I heard, it did. It did actually get the approval of Amblin Entertainment. There were no Nazis in it. It would have just been a straight-up origin story. It would have been entertaining. I don't know if it would have been as entertaining as Toon Platoon. Like I said, I haven't read the script, but it at least had a character heart to it. I think even Gary Wolfe actually at one point probably penned something, or is currently tapped to pen something in the Roger Rabbit universe at this part. I've seen several credits that they've asked Wolfe to do a couple of projects. I don't know if he's written any scripts or treatments or anything, but I'm sure that at some point even he would have been involved in these pictures. So why wasn't it made? Well, you got to think about, well, what's going on in technology, what was going on for money. Eisner was a business guy. And these Roger Rabbit movies, a full-length Roger Rabbit movie, even done 10 years ago, 15 years ago, would have been pretty expensive. Very expensive. Even with computers, it still would have been very expensive and laborious to make. Roger Rabbit was not an easy film to make, and it was not made quickly. It was expensive, it was laborious, and it made its money back, but it was a gamble. Even Disney admitted this. Putting your money behind another Roger Rabbit film would have been very difficult to do. But they had a script, they had the approval of Spielberg. Now all you had to do was prove that you could make it. Hollywood does these things they call tests, whether they be screen tests and stuff like that. They wanted to do a screen test to prove that the technology that they had with the ideas that they had could make a Roger Rabbit sequel or prequel or whatever. So time and money went into developing a test. From what I read from these tests, they were going to do a Roger Rabbit prequel done like this. It would have been 2D animation over live action, but there would have been some CGI done with it, mostly with things like weapons or guns or stuff like that. Anything that the Toons would have interacted with would probably have been done with computer-generated images. But for the most part, it would have been 2D animation in regular live action. From what I was told, and I haven't seen this test myself, I don't know if this test ever leaked, I don't think it did. It was terrible. It looked absolutely terrible. It didn't work. But there was still some money involved with this project, and there was still stuff that they could do with it. So a second test was commissioned, this time doing all CGI. That test did leak. And they looked at it and they thought, this could work. This, when they saw a fully 3D, regular live action over CGI, they thought that could work. It looked good. Now I've seen the footage. I don't know if I can include the footage here, but can we? Can we roll the footage? You see? See? They looked at that and they saw dollar signs, basically. Money. They knew how much that was going to cost, and it was going to be a lot. And they knew that if they were going to take a gamble like that, they had to have at least some guaranteed return on that. Michael Eisner saw a formula, basically, and that a sequel, while released, can never do as good as an original, at least financially. If you make a sequel to a movie, it'll probably do, best case scenario, about a third of what the original would make. So he looked at what the numbers of what Who Framed Roger Rabbit made versus its budget, compared it to what he would have to spend in order to make Who Framed Roger Rabbit's prequel or sequel or whatever, and what he expected its return to be, and thought the numbers simply just didn't add up. It didn't make basically financial business sense to produce the film at the time. The money that was set aside to make this Who Framed Roger Rabbit prequel basically went into Treasure Planet and a little movie that you may know called Pearl Harbor. I am not kidding. I would have paid to see a Roger Rabbit movie. I don't think anybody paid to go see Pearl Harbor. It was a bomb the day it came out. Critics hated it. Nobody went to go see it. I think my father saw it on paid cable at some point. He might like it, I guess. There's a song about it in that movie, Team America World Police, about how bad it was. I don't want to say the lyrics, but just look up that song. Really, it basically, I'm sure it says everything. There was a funny parody made of it, but that was about it. Right, who was wrong, I'm not going to judge. I'll let you guys draw your own conclusions on that. That's the best information that I can provide up until this time about this particular thing. But I'm still hoping for a Roger Rabbit sequel. I know. You're probably asking yourself, it's been 20 plus years, 25 years. The Star Wars prequels were bad. Anything that's made this long afterwards is at best considered a cash-in. I don't know. I'd still like to go see a Roger Rabbit movie. The scripts look pretty entertaining. I heard that they are in the production of basically making a Roger Rabbit movie right now as we speak. In fact, there's even an IMDb entry for it. I know Bob Hoskins, unfortunately, cannot be involved because, unfortunately, he passed away a few years ago. Rest in peace, Mr. Hoskins. Charles Fleischer has said that he would come back for any future Roger Rabbit stuff. I'm really happy about that. I really like Charles Fleischer. I think he's hilarious. I don't know about the other guys or the other girls that worked on the picture, if their involvement. Kathleen Turner's, I don't know if she'd be interested. The guy who played Baby Herman, I don't know if they'd be interested in, but they did provide their voices for Roger Rabbit shorts. They did provide their voices for the Roger Rabbit ride and for Toontown. So I don't know. We'll let Providence talk about this, but I really would have loved to have seen the Toon Platoon. I would have paid to go see that. Would have made a lot better movie than Pearl Harbor, let me tell you. I would. So that's some of my thoughts about where I think Hollywood failed there. They failed because I think the failure was the fact that they chose to bankroll movies that they really shouldn't have, instead of making a Roger Rabbit sequel that probably would have been pretty good. But over 10 years after that fact, it's been, Michael Eisner was no longer with Disney. And I'm not even blaming Eisner for this. Like I said, Eisner, he saved the company. I'm not blaming Spielberg for this either. You're a great director. I love Jaws. I can't live without Raiders. If you want a Roger Rabbit sequel, go to Disneyland, take a ride on the cartoon spin. That's my thoughts on it. They did a really good job on that ride. That was probably one of the best rides they ever produced. I cannot believe that they never made it for Disney World. It would have been perfect in the MGM, now Hollywood Pictures theme park. It would have been perfect. But that's business for you. Hope you enjoyed the video. Please post a comment what you think about the ongoing Fail series. I don't know if I'm going to be doing Fail anymore. I really think I've said all I need to say for right now. But if you've enjoyed the series, I'd love to hear your thoughts about it and what you think I should talk about for future fails. Until next time, guys, this is Maniac with GameAccess.net. Take care. Over and out.